Okay, very good. So one of the reasons for talking about this topic, I think we have a crisis of leadership. I think in Buddhism and in the world generally, I think we lack. We constantly seem to choose like really bad leaders for some reason, and like just like everywhere, and like in corporations and governments and so on. And we've had like years of having like leadership, like books and like courses and whole institutes on leadership. And we've got all of this information and training, everything about leadership, like psychology of leadership and methods and all these. And it just we just seem to just keep doing the same thing. It's just appointing, putting terrible people in positions of leadership. And I think it's kind of weird. And I think that something that we need to consider and to reflect on, certainly from a Buddhist point of view. So from one of the things that I've observed in Buddhism over the years is, and I hope this isn't inappropriate to say this, but I tend to find that most Buddhists seem to want to be followers rather than leaders. Do you think that, I don't know if that's true or not, but that just seems to be the impression that I've got. And I feel like for many years I've been trying to encourage people to take initiative, to take leadership, and so on. And of course, there are many good people who have done that. I'm certainly not saying that it's absent in any way, but generally speaking, I think that most people come to Buddhism, they want to be led. They want somebody to tell them what's what. They want to be told what to do, and they want to be given a nice, clear framework. This is what you want to do. And look, it's very understandable, right? That's very nice to have, okay, this is what you do, A, B, C, D. That's great. And all I have to do is do that, and then I'll be good, right? It's very understandable and very nice in many cases, but does tend to have some problems because, first of all, if you're just doing what the leader tells you, then how do you learn to trust the leader? And this is something which is discussed in the suttas by the Buddha on many occasions. Actually, he talked about the topic of leadership on many occasions. And he gave criteria for what makes a good leader. So, for example, in the Sangha, as the community of monks and nuns, and we have like leadership positions within that community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how leadership is handled in the Sangha according to the Vinaya, as it was laid down by the Buddha, which is very different from how leadership is handled in the Sangha as it exists today. So if you look at the Sangha today, then you would be forgiven for thinking that Sangha is meant to be an absolute top-down hierarchy, where you have the one at the top who says what's what, and everybody else says, yes, Bhante, and then that's it. And there's no questioning, there's no feedback, and there's no possibility. And very often it's almost like to question the leader is like inherently morally problematic. Like if you're the one who's questioning, there must be something wrong with you. Why can't you just, not make problems? And this kind of attitude, I think, is fostered a lot within the Buddhist community. It's something that I personally have struggled with because my personal characteristics, I hate patriarchy and hierarchy and all of these things. I loathe and detest it with every fiber of my being. And yet people put me in these positions of being a patriarch as if they expect me to endorse their views. But I don't. I really don't. And I would love it if you didn't put those things on me. As we learn in Buddhism, what we should be learning is some kind of self-confidence to be able to have our own ideas and to make our own opinions. And it's nice to be able to offload our own opinions onto someone else. The problem with that is that once we start to give up on our own inner moral capacity, then we'll always be put into situations where the guidance of the leader is not going to work. And we encounter this kind of thing constantly in the Vinaya, because we live according to a code that is 2,500 years old. And yet we have to somehow apply that today. And people will often say, but not everything is the same as it was then. And they'll say this to monks or to nuns as if we hadn't noticed. Really? Really? Is it true that not everything is the same? Huh? Well. And what's really remarkable about the Vinaya is not that there are some things that have changed and some things that don't apply today. What's remarkable is how relatively few those things are, and how relatively small are the adjustments that we have to make in order to do things in the world as we live it today. Now, so there are some things that we change in the Vinaya that are fairly uncontroversial. So I'll just give you one example. I'm wearing my robe, which is a katina robe sewed for me by the community here. And according to the actual katina, you're supposed to place the robe cloth on a wooden frame, and then all of the sangha is supposed to come and sew by hand to sew the robe together. That's how they would do it in those days. Now, we don't do that these days. We use sewing machines. And I don't think anybody is really complaining about that. No one's asking. Like, some people do actually sew their robes by hand, but it's more just like a special practice that they want to do. And everyone seems to say, okay, we'll wear sewn robes with a sewing machine, and that's good to go. So there are many things which are like that, which have changed, and which, in a way, are kind of unproblematic. However, even that small and apparently innocuous example isn't nearly as innocuous as it seems. Why? Because in the Buddha's day, robes were rare, expensive, and hard to get because they all had to be sewn by hand. Today, robes are, relatively speaking, much cheaper. Now, the result of that is that most monasteries have storerooms that are piled high with robes, like so many robes. When I first came here to Lakanta Vihara in Harris Park, I said to Deepika, helping me organize, I said, we have to tell people, please don't offer robes, because we are going to be overwhelmed with robes very, very quickly, and we can't do anything about them. Normally, we have one set of robes, and we wear them usually for about 3 years or something like that. So you end up with whole storerooms with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sets of robes, which have no use. You could maybe shred them and use them in brick making or something like that, but there's really very little you can do with them. So then that creates, in a way, a question for leadership, for how do you make decisions, right? Because do you continue to just continue that practice of offering robes and so on, as was done in the past, or do you try to make some changes to the way that that's organized? So that's just a small example of how something which is apparently innocuous can actually have much greater effects. Now, as I mentioned before, in the Sangha today, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it was supposed to be set up in a top-down hierarchical form, and that's how it's been established. The system I'm most familiar with is in Thailand, where you have a literal Sangha Act. So there's an act of parliament that establishes the governance of the Sangha, and under that act, the Sangha Act, you have the king and the government appoint the leading Sangha council and the Sangha Raja, that literally like the head of the Sangha or the king of the Sangha, and they have the authority to legislate how things are done in the Sangha, like ordinations and so on and so forth. And that's how that's done. And for many people, that's just the way it's always been. But in fact, that way was invented in Thailand around the early 20th century. It's not very old at all. It was invented by the then Thai leading clans in imitation of the Vatican. They wanted to copy what the Vatican was because that's the modern Western thing to do. And they used that as a way of ensuring national unity during a colonial period when every other country around them was falling to colonial powers. Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia. Thailand was the only country that resisted the colonial powers. And one of the ways that they did that was by centralizing religious authority and ensuring that everyone was chanting the same, everyone was bowing the same, everyone's doing the same, they like read Dhamma talks that were printed in Bangkok and sent out to the regions and so on. So I don't know, it's kind of a mixed bag. You can't argue with the success of it. They did successfully maintain their national sovereignty, which was not a small thing in that era. At the same time, they set up a model which was bitterly resisted by many people in the Sangha at that time. So many people in Thailand, especially in the north of Thailand, were fiercely independent and resisted the imposition of that authority from Bangkok. So my point here is that the systems that we see for governing the Sangha are things that have been invented at a certain point in time for a particular reason or a particular purpose. They're not necessarily what the Buddha wanted. So what did the Buddha want then? Well, the Sangha is not set up like all the things I just described there. It's got nothing to do with how the Sangha was set up. And I'll just briefly describe how the Sangha was supposed to be run according to the Vinaya. First thing to do is all the monastics in the community are equal. That's number one, okay? So it's absolute equality in the Bhikkhu community and absolute equality in the Bhikkhunī community. Nobody has any more power than anybody else. And so there's no power whatsoever of command or authority within the Vinaya. No monk or nun gets to tell any other monk or nun what to do, even if you're the teacher. So even the teacher cannot tell their direct student, cannot order their direct student what to do. If what they're asking them to do is not in accordance with the Dhamma and Vinaya, then the student not only can refuse to do it, they should refuse to do it. The Vinaya says explicitly that they should refuse to carry out any requests that are not in accordance with the Dhamma and Vinaya as they understand. So this is quite a radical proposition, that you can build spiritual communities without any power of command by individuals. Right? So how does that work? Well, who does have the power of command? Well, the community does. So the community comes together, they meet, they carry on a discussion in accordance with the Dhamma and Vinaya. This is very important. So the first thing is that everyone has to be there. So there's representation of every single person. Right? And all decisions have to be made in consensus. There are a few exceptions for non-consensus decisions, but generally speaking, all decisions should be made by consensus. Only the Sangha has the authority of command over any individual Sangha members if they operate in accordance with Dhamma and Vinaya. And now that sounds in a way, very idealistic. It also sounds to me like a kind of a nightmare. What do you mean? You're going to have a meeting every time you've got to figure out when you're going to replace the toilet paper. And you're going to have a meeting every time you've got to decide when are we going to sweep the eating hall. And you're going to have a meeting to decide, it sounds completely nightmare, right? But that's not how it works. The meetings are supposed to decide the main things. In particular, the meetings are supposed to decide who is the Sangha official. Okay, so a Sangha official can be appointed who has authority within that sphere. This is what's important. So one Sangha official might be, for example, looking after the lodgings of the monastery. Right? Now, when the Sangha appoints that monk or that nun to look after the lodgings, then whenever a guest arrives, then they take them to the lodgings, look after them, and make sure that they're taken care of, and that's their responsibility. And within that sphere of responsibility, they have authority that's vested in them by the Sangha. And the Sangha shouldn't go around questioning and undermining that authority without good reason. If they think, for example, Sujato was appointed as the Sangha officer to look after lodgings, and he's then gone ahead and given all of his mates the best cooties, right? Then they can come to me and complain about it, and I can say, well, tough luck, mate. And but then they can bring it back to the Sangha. So this is the Sangha officers are supposed to do their duty in a proper way. One of those ways is without what they call the four biases, right? Four biases. Number one is favoritism, right? So if I am doing my work with favoritism, then I can be removed from that office. Another one is from anger. Right? I don't like somebody, so I'm going to give you the worst kuti. From delusion, maybe I'm very stupid. Perhaps there's a very old monk, and I give him a kuti at the top of the hill, and he has to walk up and down the top of the hill. Then that's delusion, or out of fear. Right? I also shouldn't be making decisions out of fear, right? Which means that if I think, hang on, that monk, he's kind of rough. If I don't give him the kuti he likes, maybe he'll beat me up. So I better make sure that he gets the kuti he likes. So you can see that these kind of principles for the operation of a Sangha officer are still very much how we would expect officials and leaders to act today. Like we would expect leaders to act without favoritism and so on and so forth. So this is one of the things. The other thing that a leader is supposed to have in Sangha is they're supposed to have competence. And I know, crazy, right? Crazy notion that you should actually know what you're talking about. You should be familiar with the Dhamma, familiar with the Vinaya, and you should be able to have the intelligence to be able to work out how to apply that in a particular situation. You should also be operating from a perspective of metta. So you're always trying to look out for people and trying to help people. So these are some of the criteria that we would expect from people in a leadership position within the Sangha. So those people would have authority to run those departments, if you like, without oversight, because it's been vested in them in the Sangha, but that doesn't give them overall power over things. So that's how the Sangha is supposed to work. Rare it is indeed to find a monastery that actually operates in that way. And of course, there are always difficulties and problems with trying to implement things, but that's how it's supposed to work. So this is giving us an idea of how leadership works. Now, one of the things that we can see that's happening there is that system was established by the Buddha, right? Which means that the Buddha was not jealous about his own power as a leader. Now, the Buddha himself is the exemplary leader for the Buddhist tradition, and he led by inspiration and example as much as he could. The beginning of the monastic code, the beginning of the Vinaya, starts with the Buddha's enlightenment. Right? So the Buddha's authority stems from his own insight into reality, into truth. And one of the Buddha's fundamental claims is that he always speaks and acts in accordance with that truth. Yatha vadi tatha karita. How as he speaks, so he does. And as I said before, the Buddha spoke a lot about leadership, and in fact gave a number of quite detailed discourses on how to test for a good leader. So that's one of the ways of testing for a good leader, is to ensure that they act in accordance with how they speak. Okay? I mean, if we had that as a leadership principle today, things would be very different, right? That if we expected leaders to actually do what they talk about. Other qualities that a leader should have, for example, a leader should have a quality of being able to take criticism. Right? Criticism should be welcome. And another quality that a leader should have is a leader should be able to speak and to talk directly to the issue. Some years ago, I attended a climate change event in Sydney, and they had it was organised at the university, Western Sydney Uni or something. Big hall, lots of students there, like 1,000 students. They had the then premier, I can't remember who it was. We went through a few premiers at that time. Anyway, the then premier of New South Wales came out, and when he came out, all of the students unanimously pulled out a hard hat, like a worker's hard hat, put it on, held up a sign, and shouted, "No new coal, no new coal, no new coal." It was like this is like extremely well organized activism, right? So the students had obviously organized themselves incredibly well. So there's been great leadership from the student movement. right? I mean, what does it take to actually get 1,000 students to do like that, right? So it was a very powerful statement. And so the premier's on stage and he's listening, waits till it dies down, and he says, look, I hear what you're saying. I'm going to address that issue, but first let me say, talked about irrelevant things for 10 minutes and then walked off. Yeah. So that is an example of poor leadership. Yeah? The leader should speak to what is relevant. And I've been very lucky as a monk since I've ordained. The vast majority of times I've been with good leaders who've been always very good to me, very kind and very supportive. So I'm very lucky in that way. But still, I can think of some examples where I didn't see good leadership. Like one example I noticed when I was a young monk. Okay, so I was living in a kuti, in a hut in the forest in Wat Nanachat in northeast Thailand. And that monastery is kind of built in a swamp. So when it rains, a lot of the areas, you've been there? Yeah, a lot of areas get muddy and so on. And some of the muddy parts are very slippery. So I used to come out from my kuti and slip over in the mud on the way for the morning meditation. It's early, like we started meditation like 3:30 or something. So it's like 3:15 in the morning and you're already covered in mud. It's not great. So then I asked the then abbot, I said, look, can we put some paving stones or something down so it can make it easier? He said, oh, it's good mindfulness practice. Like, oh, thank you, Ajahn. But see, the thing is that, like, if you look in the Vinaya, the Buddha never said anything like that, right? There are hundreds of cases where similar kinds of issues were brought to the Buddha, and he would never do that. He would always say, oh, sure, put down a paver. And whenever the complaint was made, he would always just address the complaint to the things being talked about. And the only time you only depart from that when the person who's asking the question is not asking in good faith, right? If they have bad intentions, right, and they're not asking in good faith, then sometimes you need to not answer the actual issue because it's important to answer the issue behind the issue. But generally speaking, as a leader, you should address what people want. So these are some of the qualities that a leader has. But more important than any of these individual or practical questions is a question of vision. So a leadership is somebody who should lead. That means that they are in front and they are walking in a particular direction. And they are inspiring people who want to come along. Okay? So a leader should not be leading by punishing. They should not be leading by cruelty or hurting. And they should not be leading by force, and they should not be leading by trickery or deceit. They should be leading by offering a vision of where we want to go and inspiring people to follow that. And I think I do really feel that this has been a major area where we have really lost a sense of vision and a sense of leadership today. We have, I think, relinquished our sense of leadership to technology. And we expect that the tech people are going to define the future. When we think of the future, we can only think of a future that's defined by technological advances. And this has caused us to stop imagining what a future could be. But imagine that things were the other way around. Imagine that we didn't invent a future because that's what some guy in Silicon Valley told us the future would be. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. I tell somebody I can't stand AI. Oh yeah, but it's the future. Is it though? Is it though? Okay, it's somebody's future. It's sure as hell ain't mine. So why do we let these people tell us what the future is? Why aren't we capable of imagining our own future? Once we imagine our own future, then we can start to ask questions like, well, what kind of technology would serve that future? Right? What are the kinds of things that we could build that are going to help us to get closer to them? Rather than letting somebody else define the future based on this kind of technological determinism. So we need to be able to articulate a vision. We need to have an idea that the future that we're going to move towards is going to be in some way, somewhere that we're going to want to live. And the Buddha articulated this vision. And he told people, I'm leading you on the path to freedom. And as we walk on the path to freedom, we can walk on a path that is characterized by harmony, by support, by love. And so we can all walk that path by which we let go of happiness and find greater freedom. So there has to be that vision. So what I guess what I'm kind of urging people to do is to try to think about what kind of future that you want to live in. What are the kinds of things that you can see happening today that you like, that you think are good? And look, there are many things that are happening today that are actually good, that are great, in fact. And I really wish I could look at what's happening and think, oh yeah, we're really getting better. There was a time when I felt like that, and but that was a while ago now. I'm struggling. I'm struggling to find things where I think, oh yeah, those things are really getting better. So I talked a little bit about leadership. Let me talk a little bit about following, right? Because following also is a skill. Now, if there's somebody who's offering leadership, okay, then one thing that good leadership requires is good fellowship, right? And so even though we kind of teach people to be leaders, we have leadership institutes and so on, we don't really have fellowship institutes. I don't think you could get a degree in fellowship studies, and people think that it's kind of going to be easy. But being a follower is not easy. And in fact, being a follower is often hard work and underappreciated. And followers often provide a whole lot of skills that leaders really, really need that nobody actually really pays attention to. So it's not, we shouldn't think of a follower as being something which is less than or superfluous or kind of diminished in any way. Actually, in order for there to be movement, in order to create something, then you need leadership and you need followers. So a follower does many things. One thing that a follower does is they observe and they watch and they see what is needed. A follower also asks questions. And a follower is not blind to the flaws or mistakes that a leader might have. And leaders are human. And you don't have to agree with them. Even for the Buddha, some of the Buddha's own followers disagree with him. And there's one story, for example, where the Buddha said, asked the monks to stop eating after noon. So we have a rule to only eat before noon. Now, up to that point, the Buddha would just lead by example. He would himself only eat in the morning, and he would praise that and say, this is a good practice, and by doing this, I feel light and healthy and happy, and I can meditate well in the evening. And he would encourage people to only eat in the morning. But he didn't actually make a rule about it. So this is very much, again, an example of the Buddha of how he wanted to lead. He wanted to lead by encouraging people. And at a certain point, he decided that he needed to make a rule about it. The reason why was because one of the monks had a skull for an alms bowl, and he was going for alms around in the middle of the night, and there was a flash of lightning, and some woman saw him standing outside her house with a skull in his hand and screamed. Fair enough. So the Buddha said, A, don't use a skull for your alms bowl, and B, just go for alms round in the morning. So when the Buddha said this, there were some monks, most monks were like, fine, and then there were some monks who said, but I'm not going to do this. No, I like eating in the afternoon. Come on, they said, come on, be reasonable. Most of the good food is cooked in the evening. I mean, let's face it, okay? So we're not going to just give that all up. So first of all, can you imagine, right? Can you imagine being a student of the Buddha? And then the Buddha asks you to do this thing, and then you're like, no, come on. So, right? So this is one of the qualities of leadership. I remember I think it was Gerald Ford, the US president in the 70s, who said, here I am, I'm the most powerful man in the world, and people still don't do what I ask them to. So if you're in a leadership position, don't expect that means that people are going to do what you ask them to do, or even do what you tell them to do. That would be a dictator who acts that way. So people will sometimes do it, and they sometimes won't. So the Buddha talked to these monks, and then eventually that was a kind of a hard line. He said, no, this is it. We're going to lay down this rule. So again, so we're clear that in the Buddhist Vinaya monastic code, when you break a rule, it's very gentle. So if you break that rule about eating in the afternoon, then you should confess that and say you've eaten in the afternoon, and that's it. That's like no further punishment or anything like that. So, so being a follower means being sensitive. It means being self-effacing. It means being supportive. It means looking out for other people's well-being. And there are a lot of really good qualities that a follower has. And any good leader will appreciate those qualities that a follower has. I guess the point that I'm trying to get to here is that these roles of being a leader and being a follower are not absolute, and they're not exclusive. And all of us should be a leader at some times and be a follower at some times. And there are cases when we need to lead, and there are cases where we need to follow. And being a good follower trains us to learn how to be a good leader. If, as a follower, we are blind to the flaws of the leader, and if we just follow them no matter what, then as a leader, then we are not learning that discernment to be able to notice the flaws in leadership. This is something that I've observed a lot, that when people who lack that kind of discernment to be able to actually know what are the strengths and weaknesses of a leader, when they come into leadership, they also replicate those same kinds of problems. So on the other hand, you can't be too undermining of leaders, okay? Give leaders a break, like whether it's your boss or your teacher, someone in your family or whatever, just it's a hassle, and you're constantly having to make decisions and to take responsibility and everything. So like, try to be nice to leaders, and especially to politicians. I think we should be nicer to politicians. Not like when they're bad, then we should criticize them, okay? Definitely. But politicians, and I know many of you might be shocked to learn this, actually do a lot of good things. I know, crazy, right? Here we are in Bankstown in this university building, right? Built by the government, I guess. Probably, you know, there must have been some politicians who were there who supported and so on. And we're surrounded all the time with things that have been built by the government and supplied. We drive on roads and we use the electricity and all of these kinds of things that have some kind of support. The other day we did a talk at the Granville Centre, and there were some of the staff there, and we were talking, and the new community centre in Granville is quite spectacular, actually. It's an amazing centre. And I asked them, like, whose idea was this? Right? Somebody must have thought of this and actually had the inspiration to be able to put together a really great centre like that. It takes leadership and it takes vision. So politicians should be supported for the good things that they do. If we have nothing but relentless scorn and cynicism for politicians, what good person would ever want to become a politician? We are preemptively selecting for narcissists and psychopaths. So good luck with that. Yeah? It is possible to have political systems where most politicians do the right thing and where people do have respect for politicians. I had a Polish friend who moved to Norway, and he said, you know, the biggest culture shock was not like the cold or anything like that. The biggest culture shock was that people trusted their government. It was wild. It is possible. It is possible. In Wales, they're now debating a legislation that will require the members of the Welsh Parliament to speak the truth. And if they lie while speaking from their office, they're actually guilty of breaking the law and they can be prosecuted. So that sounds pretty awesome, doesn't it? I think that's something I've long believed actually we should be doing. I think any elected official should be required to speak the truth under pain of perjury. And anyway, good to see that the Welsh government is doing that. So it is possible to hold our leaders to a better standard, and it is possible for us to aspire to leadership ourselves. And so I'm going to be probably going over to questions in a minute, but I wanted to end up with this, just for all the people who are listening, and just remember that within your environment and your context, that it's really important for you to know that there is a time for you to follow and to support leaders, and there is also a time to step forward and to become a leader yourself. And I would love it if we were to see more inspiring and innovative leadership from the Buddhist community. And that's something that, we can see here with the Metta Center, and what's been organized here is that Tina has shown that leadership in pulling, so many things together. And, I have nothing but respect for what she's managed to do. So all of you have a lot to contribute and a lot to offer. So why don't we, rather than taking the Buddha's inspiring leadership as an example that we should follow that, why don't we take that as an example that we should emulate that to show that leadership ourselves?
Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, is there any questions or anything? I'd be happy to.
Yeah, there's so everyone feel free to add some questions to the chat or put your virtual hand up and ask your questions directly as well. Actually, I was just wondering, Bhante, because you were just talking about Buddhists not being so willing to be leaders themselves.
Right.
Why do you think that's the case, and what kind of qualities could you work on to develop that confidence?
Yeah, many things. Many things. I think it's complicated, right? I think there are many things. Like, I think that there are historical reasons, right? Partly because of the colonial era, that most Buddhist countries were colonized, and that has led to a huge loss of confidence and a huge culture of shame in a lot of Buddhist cultures, especially former colonial powers. We kind of forget that actually Buddhism was a leading and probably the leading world religion in the wealthiest, most stable, and most prosperous civilizations in the world for most of recorded history, in China and in India. And so the current situation, if you look at the Buddhist world, it's very sad. It's very hard to find a Buddhist culture, Buddhist country that's actually led competently and has decent governance. Yeah? So I think we've lost a lot of confidence because of that. So I think that political situation is part of it. I think part of it also is that, like, something I've kind of struggled with a lot. Okay, so when we do retreats, attending a Buddhist meditation retreat is, for most people, it's like the most powerful experience of Buddhism that they'll have, right? It's a thing that makes a huge imprint on your mind. You spend like 10 days or whatever it is just meditating and so on. And almost all the time, retreats are done in silence. The Buddha actually forbade silent retreats. He said, what are you doing? You're living together like pigs. You're living together like cattle. This is not a Buddhist tradition. This is unallowable. I do not let you do it. This is a practice of other religions. You're forbidden from keeping a vow of silence. He was very firm on that particular point. And yet we always keep a vow of silence. I for quite a number of years, I do the same gag at the beginning of every retreat. So I'll say to people, do you want to keep a vow of silence? They put their hands up, and then I tell that story. And then I ask them again, do you still want to keep a vow of silence? And most of them still say yes. But honestly, now the more I think about it, the more I think, no, we actually just shouldn't be doing that. Right? Because you're training people that Buddhism equals silence. And then that has a whole range of bad consequences, especially, if you have any problems with like sexual harassment or sexual assault or anything like that, then you're training people that silence equals virtue. And what do you do? So I think that's something that we need to look at. The Buddha actually taught right speech. So I think that some of these things are the problem, and I think also like it's also a like a related problem is the fact that Buddhism is taught in kind of modern Buddhism is taught from basically meditation on down. So you begin by saying, okay, Buddhist practice is sitting down and doing nothing and saying nothing and being as quiet as possible, you know? And sure, that's an important part of Buddhism, but then there's all these other parts to it as well. And that idea that Buddhism actually provides us with a template of guidance for leadership, for speaking, right? All of those things. This is something most people don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Putting into practice what you taught.
Exactly. Yeah. Like all of the stuff about how you organize communities. You know, it's all in there. It's all in the Vinaya. A lot of it in the suttas as well. Yeah. Let's go.
There's a question online. So, how is equality for monastics supposed to work when there are extra rules for bhikkhunis?
Are there though?
Over 100.
Sorry, who's asking this?
If the questioner would like to.
Oh, it's anonymous, is it?
Yeah.
That's all right. That's all right. I'm not. Is it Simran? That looks like Simran.
Yeah.
Yes, Bhante, it's me. I wasn't anonymous.
How's it going, Simran?
Going well, Bhante. Thank you very much.
Are you in Jakarta?
I'm in Yogyakarta.
Yogyakarta. How's things there?
Good. I'm actually planning to go to Jakarta in end of next week for to attend Papaja Seminary. So spending 10 days as a nun. So I'm really hoping that works out.
Hang on. So you're going to become a seminary in 10 days?
So the experience of Papaja Seminary is where lay people are able to go and live just like a nun. Like obviously, well, my head's already shaven, but we adorn robes and live just like a seminary would for 10 days to experience it.
Okay.
Because I'm unable to go forth because of a medical condition. So at least it's something temporary I can do for now.
Oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. Okay, so look, and also just let you know, I'm coming to Indonesia a bit later. So check it out. I can't remember the date.
May the 27th to the 16th of June.
Thanks, Sinsin. That's awesome. Thank you. So yeah, hopefully I can see you there. Yeah, will you be coming to that? Yeah.
Yes, sure.
Okay, good. We'll look forward to seeing you then. Okay, so the question was, how can it be equal when you have more rules for nuns than for monks? Okay, yeah, sorry. Just circling back around to that. My question was, are there?
Yes.
So you should read Venerable Brahmali's essay, Introduction to the Vinaya, which you can find on Sutta Central. And he's done an analysis for that. And mostly that's kind of illusory for various kinds of reasons. There actually isn't really more rules for nuns and monks. There's a few differences in how they are organized and so on. But actually, basically, the number of rules is pretty much the same. So a lot of the cases, like a lot of those rules are things like, for example, ordination procedures, which are handled for the bhikkhus in a different part of the Vinaya. So bhikkhus actually have a lot of those rules, but they're found somewhere else, so they're not like counted in the list of rules. So there's a lot of cases like that where actually it seems like there's more rules, but actually that isn't necessarily the case. Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a complicated issue. So that's one issue. The second issue is that the number of rules isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like people, like you think, oh, look, rules are bad. I don't like rules, therefore more rules is more bad. But I don't know. I feel like if I'm driving around in Sydney, there are a lot of road rules I have to keep. And I feel like if I were driving around in Mumbai, there's probably a lot fewer road rules to keep, or at least a lot fewer road rules that are kept. So which would you rather drive around in? Like rules are actually good because they help you to manage things and manage the community. So the number of rules isn't necessarily, I think, a very good guide to anything. What is a more important guide is the like the nature of those rules, right? So there are what are the rules actually saying, and so on. And so when you look in the Vinyas at the rules as they are, and then you can find areas where the monks' rules seem to be harsher than the nuns' rules, and you can find areas where the nuns' rules seem to be harsher than the monks' rules. And there are really examples of both. So just one example of that is there's a couple of rules which are called the Aniyata rules. And the Aniyata rules apply to bhikkhus only. They don't apply to bhikkhunis. And in the Aniyata rules, essentially it says that if a trustworthy lay woman makes an accusation of sexual harassment or sexual assault against a monk, then the Sangha should investigate that and they should prosecute that monk in accordance with that accusation. So this is something which is a protection for women, which is found only in the monks' vinaya and not in the nuns' vinaya. And so that's just one example. So yes, you can find examples where things seem to be biased on one side or the other, but overall, mostly it seems fairly, it mostly is fairly equal. And, again, it's a 2,500-year-old monastic legal code. So if you want to find things, if you want to look for things that you can disagree with, yeah, sure, you can always find those things. But for the most part, it's very humane. And the thing that people often neglect about it is that it sets up the Bhikkhunī Sangha to look after themselves. So the monks have no power of command or authority over the nuns. And so that actually I find is quite radical and quite empowering. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante. One person has said online that the extra runs were for safety. For example, nuns to travel in pairs, not alone.
Right. That is also true, right? So there are, in some cases, there are genuine like social conditions and so on that need to be responded to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of comments. One person has commented that where they grew up in Sweden, they felt supported by the government due to free healthcare, childcare, schools, and infrastructure.
Right. So yeah, it's nice being in Sweden and in Norway. And I've just visited Sweden briefly for the first time. Spent like a couple of days in Stockholm, and yeah, you can definitely kind of feel it, right? There's kind of a vibe of just a vibe of people being confident and comfortable and relaxed. Yeah. And I visited Oslo for one day, and it happened to be the day that the results of the American election were announced, and which I learned in Europe they just called the election. And so when we heard about that, and then that day I went to the Edvard Munch Museum in the center of Oslo, where they have the original of the screen.
Oh.
Yeah. I never felt so seen by a work of art as when on that day.
Oh, great timing. Yeah.
I could sit there and watch the screen. And it was really, I don't know, it is really kind of noticeable how, you get to live in a place where people are just used to the idea that society kind of operates in the most sane way. The other thing which is kind of interesting about those Nordic countries, like we often sort of hold them up. I think that they're, in many ways that's good. But it's also kind of, if you think about it, like for thousands of years, these guys were like Vikings and stuff. And they were constantly warring, and the whole history, they weren't rich, and they were constantly warring and stuff for forever, for like as long as history goes back. And they've kind of really got it together the last, 100 years or something. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? So you can change in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that's due. Obviously, they've been prosperous because of oil wealth in Norway and because of steel and so on in Sweden. So there are material reasons for that, but it also comes down to good leadership. And the leaders were the ones who set it up so that the society as a whole prospered from the wealth that they created.
And there's a couple of people who are quite curious about the sutta reference for silence during the retreat.
Yeah, that's in the Kandakas in the Vinaya. So if you go to, let me see,
Sutta Central.
go to Sutta Central. Let me see. I'll just talk you through the navigation. You go on to Sutta Central, go onto the home page. Go onto the home page of Sutta Central. Sorry, I just have to find it myself. Okay. Right. And then you go to the basket of monastic law, second one, click on that. Then the top one, monastic law of Theravada school, click on that. And then you go down, it says the chapters. Third entry, and you go to that, chapters, and the chapter on, the chapter on the invitation ceremony, KD4. Go down 4 down there, the chapter on the invitation ceremony for Vihara Khandaka, and you click on that, Brahmali translation, and that should be, yes, the number of monks who were friends had entered rainy season residence together. So that's where that is. It's KD4. Yeah, it's really interesting because I mean the story is more complex than the summary I just gave there, but it's an example of an idyllic community who have done everything right to live together in harmony and meditate and practice, except then they took the vow of silence, and the Buddha really came down on them quite hard. It's very unusual, actually. Like the Buddha, you know, if you were someone like Devadatta who was trying to murder the Buddha, then yes, the Buddha came down quite hard on Devadatta. But these guys were just like living together and having a nice rains retreat, and the Buddha was quite firm. I think like part of the reason for that is that he knew how corrosive it would be for the Sangha as a whole if it became the norm that people didn't talk to each other. So I think it really is emphasizing the fact that right speech is right speech. Yeah. What do you think? Do you think it's possible to do retreats where people aren't keeping a vow of silence? Has anyone done a retreat where people were not keeping a vow of silence?
Yeah, I practice in Burma where there's all sorts of different stuff going on.
So you've done retreats in Burma. So tell me about it. So is that like a group retreat?
It's not so much a group retreat.
No.
People just come and go.
So it's more just like a monastery set up where people are coming and going. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a bit different.
That
right?
particular teacher, Sayadaw Tejaniya,
Right?
doesn't encourage silence in retreats generally.
Oh, good.
He wants you to practice awareness while you're speaking.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Otherwise,
awesome.
when are you going to practice? I mean, when are you going to get your speaking meditation practice?
Right. Really good point. Yeah. And that's interesting. I didn't know that was a Tejaniya's thing, but that sounds great. I mean, obviously it's a bit different if it's a monastery. It's not like a set retreat time, but still.
Ajahn Tanesara also doesn't like silent retreats.
Really?
Yeah. So
Oh,
I think he
I know
has
that.
3 stipulations. I'm just trying to think. I can't really think of the third one now. But it was speaking at the right time.
Right.
Speaking what's useful in line with the Dhamma.
Right.
Kind.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway.
Something like that. So basically just using right speech and keeping it to a minimum. Yeah. Like one of the things I think about that vow of silence, right? So if it was like that original context in the Vinaya and the taking a vow of silence, like ancient Indian ascetics were very serious about their vows. So if they said we're going to keep a vow of silence and that would be it, they would like literally be saying nothing at all for that period of 3 months. So I think definitely there's scope for saying less, but yeah, but that sounds good. So maybe that's what we should be doing.
You have to really practice. I suppose the monastery gives you the opportunity to really practice.
So that's in the monastery.
Yeah.
That's in the monastery. Yeah. Like I mean, my experience has always been that I've done this dozens of times now. And whenever I say, I tell that story and then I say, do you still want to keep a vow of silence? Like the number goes down. Like before, when I first asked, "Do you want to keep a vow of silence?" Almost everyone, and then afterwards, it's maybe 80% or something. But people still overwhelmingly want to keep a vow of silence. So I guess we just have to disappoint them. And
Could be a leader.
that's correct. Yeah. Should be a leader, right? And again, this is something about leadership, which I think we kind of forget, right? A leader should be out there and articulating things and persuading them and not just following people's opinions, you know? Some years ago, I was with ARC, we're doing a climate change representation. We went to Canberra, we went to see Julia Gillard in her office. It's kind of fun. And look, I've got every respect for Julia Gillard. I think she was a good Prime Minister. I think she passed more legislation per day than any other Prime Minister in Australian history or something. Quite effective. And, you know, I think she was intelligent and sincere. Anyway, we went into her office. So it was kind of interesting to see the Prime Minister's office, right? So first of all, you've got a room. It's about maybe as long as this room here, but about maybe half as wide, something like that. So quite a large space, but not like hugely large. One side was her desk. No, sorry, the first side when you come in, there was a reception area with like 4 or 5 seats around, chairs around a coffee table. And then at the other end was her desk where she did work. And in between those, a bit like this screen on the wall, right, was a board with all of the day's papers tacked up on it.
Oh gosh.
So all the morning papers were all just dominating the whole room for the whole thing. And I was like, I mean, I didn't say anything, but I really wanted to say, you know, Prime Minister, we elected you to rule and not the media. So there's a difference. Obviously, you need to pay attention to these things, but a leader should be shaping public opinion and not just reflecting. Yeah.
There's a comment online in regards to the retreat.
Yes.
Doesn't the silence help support the mind within that setting? And of course, if something needs to be spoken, it should be said. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that people go out and say things anyway, don't they? Like, I don't think people on a silent retreat are actually silent.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes maybe.
In their room.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is the thing. And I think people are kind of afraid of it, right? They're afraid that if once they get started, they don't really trust themselves or they don't really trust others. And look, not without reason. It's obviously, you know, usually if you're in a retreat, it's a closed space. And if someone's talking, then it gets very annoying very quickly if you meditate. So, you know, what I always try to say is like when you're participating on the retreat, that you think of silence not as like an imposition, but as a gift. So when you walk up the stairs, you walk as quietly as you can as an offering to the other people around you. And when you want to crack a joke about something, rather than that you can deprive the world of your wit for that one moment and just think, oh yeah, you can offer them silence instead. So yeah, should be a way of supporting each other.
Were there any questions?
I'd like to ask you a question.
Yeah, please.
I was quite inspired by your idea in your talk of vision for the future.
Right.
It's something I really think about myself.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So do you see Buddhism as a complement to a effective vision for the future, or Buddhism as the best vision for the future? I ask this question because personally I see it as in my own life as an excellent complement to this idea of solar punk. Have you ever heard of solar punk?
I have a vague idea, yeah.
So I realise from following you that you're into climate issues and etc.
I'm into like breathing on a world that isn't on fire. Yeah. That's a kind of an interest of mine. Yes.
So solar punk is like, it's almost science fiction.
Right.
But bringing into line with technology,
Right.
there's cyberpunk, which is a dystopia, but solarpunk is a utopia.
Right.
And I've been looking at solarpunk, and Buddhism really complements it with ideas of peace,
Right.
harmony,
Right.
kindness to
Right.
life, and
Right.
sentient beings. But look, just looking at the culture, exactly what you're talking about the technological culture in Silicon Valley, calling the shots, this kind of stuff. There's seems to be more people think cyberpunk is going to be fun to have robot arms and stuff. But solarpunk is a lot more sensible, and Buddhism is a great complement to solarpunk. And how do you have any visions for the future like that, or is your vision purely aligned with Buddhism? I mean, obviously.
I understand. No, I think it's good. No, I agree. I think obviously I'm a big fan of Buddhism, and I think that I would hope that we have something to contribute to a vision of the future. Yeah? But I certainly don't think that we're going to sort of be laying down a template by which people can live. But yeah, I think that sounds good, and I think that our visions of the future have to move beyond being purely determined by technology. And so when we grew up, and when I grew up, the visions of the future were called science fiction, because we just kind of assumed that science and technology were going to be defining what the future is. And I think now we need to move beyond that and to start thinking of some other vision that's going to define the future. And now that's complicated, and part of it means using appropriate technologies like solar energy, and part of it means imagining a future. The thing to me that seems crucial is that with all of our intelligence, all of our information, all of our education, why can we not imagine a future where our technology supported abundance, the abundance of life and the flourishing of life on the planet? Why is it always how much cost do we get to make? How much extraction can we make? How much destruction can we make? Why aren't we asking ourselves, how much flourishing can we promote? How much more life can there be? And so why aren't we looking to a future where our world has more sparkling fresh water and deep, rich forests and oceans, clear oceans teeming with life? And why is that something that we can't even imagine? So solar punk technology is good. I like to think also something like, if you're like, where would I like to live in the future? Lothlorien.
Lothlorien.
Yeah, like lots of nice trees and all of that kind of stuff. I think that would be great. So, yeah. But at the very least, it's only to start asking these questions, because we're definitely going through a crisis period where that vision of the future that we kind of assumed we take for granted, the vision of more and more technology, that's obviously entering a crisis. That's completely obvious. So something else has to emerge from it. Yeah, and I think I don't want to go into this too long, but I think that there are deeper reasons for the crisis beyond just a few bad actors and a few people doing the wrong thing. I think ultimately the reason behind the crisis is that technology itself has run out of steam. Like technology isn't actually advancing in the way that we thought it would, and that most of the things that technologists have sold us in the past decade or two have actually not been very useful or very good.
Diminishing returns.
Diminishing returns. Yeah, I really do feel exactly that we're hitting that with technology. Yeah, more and more expensive and destructive technology with fewer and fewer results. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got a vision to hope for. There's been a lot of debate online about the silent retreat situation, and someone wondering whether you'll have a silent retreat at the end of the year, potentially. Watch this space.
Watch this space. Yeah, look, probably. But just let people know, because when I was in Europe, I just spent like 3 or 4 months doing retreats one after the other, which is fine. But also you kind of get into a situation where you feel, have I given this talk already here, or was that I can't remember if I told this story or not. And so yeah, like I don't want to be too robotic about doing retreats all the time. So we'll probably do one at the end of the year, but we haven't quite sorted it out. We do actually have a plan, like we have a place near Sydney that we've been doing retreats, which has been working well. But we also are cooking up a plan to do a retreat out back of Bourke. So if you're looking to do an outback retreat, then watch this space, and we'll hopefully be able to do one that is in the outback, but not in Central Australia. So you can still like catch a train from Sydney and so. Yeah.
So back of Bourke is figurative.
It's actually past Dubbo. There's a university research centre which is past Dubbo, which you can do retreats at.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, let's come to 8:30. So
Okay.
Bhante, if you wanted to close off with any kind of blessing or chanting.
Okay. We can do a little bit of chanting. Finish up. Jayanto Bodhiamule Satyanam Nandivardhano Evam Tavam Vijayo Hijaya Sujaya Mangale Aparajita Palanke Sise Patavipokare Abhisekesa Babudhana Agapato Pamodati Sunakatan Sumangalan Sotobhatan Suhitang Sukarno Sumuhoto Chasuyitang Brahmachari Supadakyanang Kaya Kamam Vacha Kamam Padakyanang Mano Kamam Panipite Padakyana Nikatwana Labandate Padakyane.
So thanks again, Bhante, for finding us here.
Thank you, Mia.
At the university. And thanks everyone for joining online. I'll just finish off with a couple of announcements. So the speaker for this Wednesday at the Parramatta campus will be Venerable Choki, and she'll be talking about joy. So please come along for that if you would like to learn more about that. And next Monday, Dr. Tucker Peck will be here in person. He's coming from America, and he'll be talking about the interaction of meditation and psychotherapy. There's, for those looking for a retreat, there's a retreat this weekend, 2-day urban retreat with Venerable Vimoka. So he'll be back and he'll be giving a talk, a retreat at the Australian Centre of English. And also just letting you know to save the date. So Bhante Sujato will be giving a talk at the Metta Convention on the 8th of November. So he'll be there with others such as Venerable Matthew Ricard is coming from France, and then Joan Halifax as well. So some big speakers coming from overseas. And there'll also be a big dana for all the visiting monastics and for local monastics as well on the 15th of November. So save those dates in your calendar too. So thank you again, everyone, for joining from online, and thank you, Bhante, for coming and being here with us tonight.
No worries.
Yeah. Someone's asked online in regards to the Metta Convention. We'll post it on the chat and also on the website when we have a few more details. So, yeah, just keep an eye out on that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Bhante.
See you later. Good night, everyone.